joining me, Manuel Chevon III. Manolo, how much of a responsibility is it to have such a name?
Well, actually, it's not a bad responsibility to have. I guess it was growing up, not realizing you had a choice. And I think most kids, responsibility is not what you want as a kid. And I had a kind of extended adolescence, so I wanted to be Peter Pan and not grow up.
Well, when did it first occur to you?
Well, it was when I started really holding down a sober job. It was when I started writing for the newspapers, and you discover your voice, and you discover that it's a voice that you can use for good things, and it takes you away from yourself and what you have to do.
Okay, so you were talking about your first writing job, and that's something that sustained you for many years before you actually ventured into television.
Yeah, I started writing in 1994, and so I was already at it for, about a decade before we started out here. But again, like you were saying in your very kind introduction, it's a very different way of doing things, and you know, like precisely since you're adopting your own voice, the way you write things, as we discovered, isn't the way you should necessarily say things, and that was a running battle we had on this show. The sentences are too long, and you have to put your points first instead of last.
Well, we'll go into that because there are a lot of those growing pains, I guess, that we went through together. But going back to finding your voice, I mean, was it something that had anything to do with your own father? I mean, of course, you didn't meet your grandfather, but your father, did he inhabit the name differently from you?
Well, he had the same, as one writer told me, your dad was Frank Sinatra Jr., which has a lot of the same problems, that you grow up in the shadow of a very vivid, very strong personality, and you may not necessarily be that kind of personality. And in his time, the expectations were even greater. He was a scholar by nature, and he was as unambitious a person as you could ever hope to meet. He also was not particularly fond of big crowds or that sort of thing. So his tendency was to retreat from the world, to be surrounded by the comfort of his books. And one of my earliest essays was about how, I guess it's an unusual childhood to grow up surrounded by books. Most of my other friends are surrounded by the other things that their parents are into, whether it's business or art or the careers of their parents. And so that sort of defines things. It defines your first love is the printed word, and that is what has meaning and, in a sense, physically defines the world.
Okay, but it explains then why you became this history buff.
Well, not necessarily. Also, because well, yes, to a certain extent, but also it's because if you grow up, I guess, surrounded by history, you soon realize when you deal with people who aren't surrounded by that particular history that they have their own, and then it always becomes a clash of civilizations for people of different views. As a student in UP, you realize that there's a very radical interpretation of the past there, and how do you and it makes you curious. I mean, you can always choose to either close your eyes or understand it, and I mean, eventually you're going to go to the name of the show. You have to explain it to yourself before you can make sense of things.
Okay, but so why did you think it necessary, gaining the explanations for yourself, why did you feel this need to spread it out there?
Well, because it's writing in the newspapers. It's, as they say, it's literature in a hurry. It's history done by the deadline. And you start realizing that if there's one sort of limitation our society suffers from, is that there is no reference to where things started and how things either have a cycle, or sometimes people are doing a lot of moving around for something that has already been done, which means why are we trying it again if it didn't work the first time around, or why are we always repeating things? It became a very interesting problem for me. And again, it was something that other writers weren't focusing on, and so your tendencies, your interests inform what you can bring to the table. It's something I discovered that I had an interest in that others didn't, and that's where I could contribute.